This video is about low demand communication. It will give an explanation of why and how communication can feel stressful for people with learning disabilities, how they might respond to this stress, and ways that you can minimise stress from communication. Let's start by clarifying what is meant by communication demands. Every day we communicate directly with people or in the presence of other people. This can be verbal or non-verbal. When we communicate, we have expectations of reciprocal interaction from others. Other people's expectations can contribute to stress about how we communicate or respond. Stress releases hormones that make thinking skills, including communication skills, harder to use. People can feel self-conscious of what others expect from their communication. These expectations are therefore perceived as demands. For example, if someone asks you a question, you know they're expecting some form of response. If you feel under pressure to respond, stress can easily build up. Communication demands can be particularly hard for people with learning disabilities, autism, or dementia, who, even before stress, may find communication more difficult. Consider how difficult and exhausting you would find your day if all communication was in language that you have a more limited understanding and experience of, perhaps only having learnt basics at school a long time ago. There are many factors that increase the demand or the stress, such as how the person's feeling, if they know who they're talking to, if it's a noisy or busy environment, or the time of day or topic of conversation. It's useful to think of the demands people feel in different communication situations as being on a scale. The order of this hierarchy will depend on the individual, but we'll show an example to help you consider the different levels of demand and control someone will feel in different scenarios. At the least demanding end of the scale is being apart from other people, where you may do your own thing or observe others from a distance. No one has any expectations or is making demands for you to communicate. For some people, when alone, they find talking or communicating in other ways easy because there's no demand felt from other people's expectations. Next on the scale may be joining the group, but without paying attention to or interacting much with others in it. For example, allowing someone to do up your shoelaces, but not showing any response to what they're doing, or maybe not responding if someone offers you food. Next along the scale of perceived demands, a person might comment on things in their environment, but perhaps not direct this at a communication partner. They might choose to talk or interact with pets, animals or objects that aren't able to respond, as this feels less demanding. The next level may then be taking notice of what others communicate non-verbally, or being able to respond or comply with requests where the situation gives clear clues about what's expected or what they're being asked to do. This might be being offered a toothbrush and knowing that it's time to brush your teeth, looking through a photo album and nodding or smiling as someone points out familiar people in the photos. In these examples, the visual clues, so the toothbrush and the photograph, reduce some of the stress of having to give your attention, listen, understand the language of what is being said, and come up with a response. After this, responding to comments or suggestions that people make in a low demand or indirect way might come next. A person might perceive less demand from statements or phrases that are indirect, so for example saying, "I think shepherd's pie for tea tonight," rather than asking, "Do you want shepherd's pie?" Or when looking through holiday pictures, avoiding direct questions like, "Tell me about the weather in Spain," in favour of comments such as, "It looks hot there." Further along the scale would be responding to someone by using whatever means of communication the person finds easiest. This could be pointing, sighing, smiling, drawing, writing, clapping, and so on. For most people who find communicating very demanding, the top end of the scale would be being asked lots of questions. Other factors that will impact stress and ability to communicate are familiarity with the situation and people, whether the person is feeling healthy, alert, calm, or agitated. For some people, being in a busy, noisy environment could make communication harder, whereas for others, a one-to-one quiet environment might feel more pressured, with more focus on them. So, how do people respond to communication demands? Well, some people may just avoid communication demands by not responding or avoiding the situation. Other people respond using more basic means of communication. For example, if they're unable to verbally express the anxiety they're feeling, they might use their behaviour, such as hitting out at other people. Others may use strategies to mask their difficulties, such as going along with what you say, or using a learned phrase like, yeah, or oh, it depends, when they know a question has been asked, but they don't know how to answer you. As people, we are eager to please, so tend to give a response to move the conversation on. Some people will try to redirect your attention to something else to relieve the pressure they're feeling, or they might change the subject to something they find easier to talk about. Some people avoid the demands of having to process what is said to them by repeating what they've heard. They might repeat the whole thing or just the last part. For example, if asked, would you like pizza or pasta? They might say pasta. But if the question had been rephrased as, would you like pasta or pizza? They would have said pizza. This can make it hard to know what a person really wants. So, how can we help people who find communication demanding? Think about an individual's scale of demands. If someone is struggling, take a step down on the scale and try again. Remember, it can be very tempting to encourage someone to communicate by asking lots of questions. However, as these require a response, questions are very demanding. In typical adult conversation, it's estimated that we make 7 comments, so statements like, lovely weather today, that sounds nice, to every 1 question that we ask. Comments can provide opportunities for people to join in with communication without the pressure of expectation for a response which comes with questions. Here's an example. Jason goes to the cinema every fortnight. When staff directly ask him what he's been to see, he either doesn't respond or takes a very long time to reply. However, if staff make an indirect comment, such as, I hear there's a new Lion King film in the cinema, Jason finds it much easier and quicker to reply. In this instance, he actually said, yes, it's got Beyoncé in it. It's important to think about how to make communicating as easy as possible for the person. A communication assessment from a speech and language therapist can highlight what aspects of communication are easy and difficult for someone, and any strategies you can use to help, and subsequently reduce demands. Examples include understanding how much information a person can take in at a time, and what type of words and grammar are difficult for the person to understand, and how to adapt what you say. Speech therapists can give you support in using pictures, signing, gestures and objects to help the person pay attention to, understand and retain what you say. Strategies like talking mats can help people express preferences, or comic strip conversations or social stories when talking about a situation. It also helps people to understand what to expect if things are predictable and consistent, like following a routine which makes them less reliant on having to process what people have said to know what is happening. They may feel more relaxed if supported by a consistent and familiar group of people who follow the plan and are therefore more predictable. Having other means of communication available for the person can also make interacting feel less demanding. This can include objects or pictures to make choices from, having a book of photos about their interests as an easier way for them to share information about things that are important to them rather than having to think of the words and grammar. Speech and language therapists can give advice on communication aids like this. Some people find eye contact or direct communication stressful. For these people, commenting on pictures that you can both look at, like a photo album, may feel less demanding than conversations where you would tend to look at the person. Earlier we talked about learned responses. Learned responses are things like laughing along to a joke when you haven't really understood it. It's important to accept these, as they are a social strategy that some people use to save face. If you suspect someone's doing this, don't point out what they've done. We've all been known to smile and nod along at a joke we haven't understood. Learned responses like these can enable somebody to still feel included. Choose your battles and environment. Whilst it's great to encourage independence through choice making and maximise communication, things such as decision making and expressing preferences can feel very demanding for someone who finds communication hard or stressful. At times of high stress, we can help people by reducing the options and making an offer instead. For example, by saying, "Let's see Mum today," and then looking at the person to gauge a non-verbal response. Preempting events or situations where communication is likely to be stressful, like a trip to the doctor's, is a useful strategy. This could be planning a low-demand conversation about what needs to be discussed ahead of the appointment, for instance by writing down what the person needs to talk to the GP about with someone they trust. This trusted person can always convey the information if the person is unable to say it when faced with the demands of the appointment. A final piece of advice is to accept the ways that someone has of communicating that are unconventional. For example, if they prefer to write or text rather than speak, if they mispronounce words, or if they use signs that you don't think are the same as widely known Makaton or British Sign Language. As long as you know what their signing means, there's no need to correct them. Share that knowledge with others who support them. By accepting all communication, we ensure that the individual is communicating using the least demanding method they can. We hope this video has helped you to understand how the demands of communicating can be a cause of stress, and that it has given you some ideas of how to adapt your communication for people who experience this. For more information or strategies that can be used to support the communication of adults with a learning disability living in Sheffield, please refer to Speech and Language Therapy via the contact details on the screen. Thank you for listening.